Hey there, developers! What is going on? I'm the Savage Coder, and this is episode 20. Sorry about the little delay there. I got a little under the weather, but things are back to normal now, so we can get back on a more normal schedule. And we're going to continue with our user signup. Last we left off, we set up our UI to capture all of our data from our users, bind that data to a model, and get ready to send it over to our API with an encrypted password. So today, we're going to set up the API side to accept that and get it to look up a user in the database, and we can create a token, and let's see how far we get through that. I don't want to I'm just going to kind of wing this episode because I'm not sure where I want to cut things off as far as getting into SQL or not. It depends how quickly we can get through. So before we jump in, because this is our 20th episode, which is really exciting for me, thank you for the support so far. I took our little intro bumper, which is currently this, and I put some live guitar and bass and programmed up some drums and put some keyboards in it. And I turned it into the new live version, which is this. All right, as always, you can get the code from github.com/noblecausecode. Those links are in the description, as well as the link to how to download episode code. So jumping right in, here is where we last left off, which was we've got our user sign up object, which we're going to have to duplicate on the API side for now. We will be replacing that later on. And then we're calling out to our API using Floral with our local host, and we're calling the API/users with a post. So let's pull up our API code, and we're going to have to create a controller to respond to this API users. So let's bring our code in. First thing we need to do is create a new controller. So let's go ahead and do that with an add controller. It is an API empty controller. And the name of that is going to be users with an S controller. So next thing we want to do is we want to add our endpoint, which is an HTTP post. So we put that attribute in there, and we are going to make a public async task of I action result. This is the same that we've done pretty much for every controller endpoint so far. And if we look back in our UI, we see that we're going to call this API users, and it's a post. So really, it's just the insert of users. Normally, the way that we do that is we just call this a post as well. You can also call it insert if you want to. We'll keep it at post because that's kind of says what it is, right? It's a post to the users controller, which is an insert. And we're going to be passing in the users sign up argument that's coming from our UI. So this is the user sign up. Looks like it's singular here, so let's try and name it the same. So let me take that out. And we don't have that yet in our models, so we're going to have to add that in here as well. And we also need to call out to a service layer here. So we'll have a call that'll call the service, and then we will return our OK at the end. When we're inserting, we don't generally return things from a post, or we could return, better than an OK, we could return a no content, which will return a 204, I believe. Yeah, 204. And that's just kind of standard return type, means OK, everything worked, but I have nothing back to give you. So let's go ahead and create this user sign up first. And this is going to be an API model. This is what users are going to send us. So that's exposed as part of the API. So I'm just going to add a new class to our models API folder, and that'll just be called the user, if I can type, sign up. And we can actually steal the user sign up from our UI model because the properties in this case are going to be the same. So I'm just going to copy those and move them into our API. I'm going to do a Control-RG to clean up these unused usings, and then we'll go back to our controller and we'll bring in we'll import the using namespace. And I'll do a Control-RG here too. And post is complaining now because we told it it's async and we haven't made an async call yet. We're going to do that to our service, but we need to create that first. So let's do that now. So I'm going to go into services. I'm going to do add a class, and I'm just going to call this users service. And we need to inject that into our controller. So let's add an interface. And we'll name it users service. And we'll make that public. Having trouble typing today. And then we will implement the user service in our user service. So now we can make the service level method that handles the creation of users. So let's just do public async task. And we can really call it whatever we want. I'm just going to call mine insert user. So we're going to pass in that same user sign up that the UI is going to send us. And this will call out to our repository layer with the same pattern. So we may as well just create a dummy one of those first. So I'm going to add new item, and we'll call this users repository. And we'll add a class called not but just users repository. And I'm going to go back to my interface and make it public. And I'm just to flip back and forth between these files. If you don't see me clicking on the file names here, I'm just using Control and Tab. And if I just do Control and Tab, it'll quickly flip between the last two files that I was in. And if you hold your Control and hit Tab and let go, but keep holding Control, you'll actually get a list of all the files that you've had recently open, and you can just tab through those. So that's all I'm doing there. So I'm going to copy the interface and implement it in my class. And then in here, we're going to also have something with the same name as our service, just to make it easy to line up. And we'll just call that insert user as well. It's going to take a user sign up, but in the real world, we wouldn't use this same class, and we'll get to that. I'm going to be splitting up some of these domain and API concepts, probably, if not in the next episode, the one after that. But for now, let's just use one, keep it simple so that we can get this all working. And in here, we're not going to do it just yet. We're going to connect to the database and, insert the new user. Cool. So now let's go all the way back to our user's controller, and let's use dependency injection to bring our service into our controller. So I'm going to make a private variable to hold our service. It's of type users service, and we'll call it _users service. And we'll make that read only as well. and bring in the namespace for our service. Now I can just click on this light bulb and I can generate my constructor. When the dependency injection injects this, it will assign that private variable. And so while we're thinking about this, we should probably go into our startup and add these two things into our dependency injection. So it's the same as these two lines. Sometimes I copy it. Sometimes I just type it out. I probably shouldn't type it out today because, man, my typing is horrendous today. users service, and it will create a user service when it needs an iUser service. And services, there's more discussion on this in previous episodes if you're interested in this. Add singleton iUsers repository and users repository. Okay, so now anytime a constructor needs one of these two things, it will create one of these as a singleton and pass that in. So in the case of our controller, it needs an iUser service, so it will just pass one in. And then here, we're going to await this async call to our user service, and it doesn't see the method we just did because I forgot to go into the interface and expose this guy here. So first thing, we also missed, I'm a little rusty from having some time off sick. So we can bring in our using statement. I'm going to control RG there as well. And this name actually should be insert user async because it is an async call. So I'm going to change that in my repository right now before I forget. And then we want this whole task and the method and the argument that that method takes, we want that added to our service interface. And I will RG and bring in our using statement. Cool. Then let's do the same thing for our repository layer because I didn't put that one in either. And we will add that one to the interface, add our user sign up namespace and RG to clean that up. All right. Back here now, if we hit dot, we see our insert user async and it takes in our user. That's good for there. So now let's go look inside our service. We need to inject our repository. So same pattern, private, read-only, iUsers repository, and we'll call it use_users repository. And we can bring in the namespace and have it generate our constructor, and then we will await the users repository dot insert user async, and we will pass it the user all the way down from the UI, passed over to the controller, passed to the service, passed down to the user repository, and finally we can connect to our database in here. So we do have a problem about connecting to our database to add a new user. Well, what is the problem? The problem is we need a stored procedure in our database to add users. So I'm going to connect in SQL Server. There is episode 17 will show you how to do some basic database maneuvering. I did do some editing of some of this stuff after I shot that episode, so I'm going to go over it here just so that everything is clear, and in case something changed, I want to make sure that your database looks like my database. So I had created an STP users insert, and that was to insert users. So we first have to make sure that all of our model that we're sending in, first name, last name, email, password, username, and postal code, we have to make sure those are in here. They look good. And I think one thing we want to make sure that we do, and we'll probably add this later, is to make sure that we're not inserting a user with the same email address or probably even the same username. That would probably be a bad idea. So we could write some SQL code to just tell it, hey, don't insert another row if these are the same. Or we could add some constraints to the table that says these are unique values, don't allow those to be duplicated. But for now, let's just keep it simple, and we'll go back and add all these kind of enterprise level checks, or maybe not enterprise, but production level checks at least. So this looks good. I do want to look at my user table to make sure that looks the same as yours. I believe this is fine. So we're going to add the first name, last name, email, password. The password that we're sending in here is encrypted. So looking back here at the UI project, remember we did the crypto.hash password. So what we're sending over to our API is already an encrypted password. So we can go ahead and safely store that inside here. And the end goal here is that we're going to make sure the password is okay, but then we're going to issue a token, JWT token, back to our UI code so that it can make API calls and be an authenticated user, and the API will know to trust that that user is logged in. So we're making all users active that sign up. They are not confirmed. We're putting a 0 in for that value. That's because they need to confirm their email address. We don't have that functionality yet, but we will. And then the created and modified date will just get automatically set by get date. None of these last 4 things get sent into our stored procedure. So we just have to call this STP users insert, and it should run that code, and everything should be wonderful. And we'll also add some error handling and stuff into our stored procs, but I want to make this kind of go before we get into final touches like that. Okay, so let's make sure that in your dependencies packages that we have, well, we don't need lorem.net anymore. That is old, so I'm going to delete that. And we're going to add in, by right-clicking dependencies, and do manage NuGet packages. We're going to add in Dapper. I prefer Dapper over Entity Framework. I don't have a problem really with Entity Framework. I think it's fine if that's a good match for what you need. But to me, Dapper is just a smoking, lightweight, really easy to use data layer that I really love it. So that's what I'm choosing to use. All right, so once we install Dapper, it's that simple. We can now use Dapper. So first thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to put everything in a try-catch block. And we'll handle our errors that way. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a connection object. Now, SQL connections are idisposable. So what that means is really when you use them, you have to call close. Like if you open a SQL connection to a database, you're supposed to be responsible for closing that connection. And you also when you're done with using the whole object, you're supposed to call dispose on that object. And that kind of allows .NET to clean up all of the resources because you're done with them. Well, rather than having to type close and dispose, .NET gives us, and .NET Core gives us the using keyword, which we're going to use here. It is different than this using keyword up at the top that brings in your namespaces. I wish they would have picked a slightly different word for this, but this is what it is. So the using that we use here just has parens and it has a method body. And the method body is the scope of where your resources will live, and then you define your resource inside this using statement. So I'm going to create my connection called var connection, and I'm going to make it equal to a new SQL connection. And inside my new SQL connection, if we bring that namespace in, oh, we don't have our system.data.sql client. So there's two ways to go get system.data.sql client. We can just choose this install package system.sql.data client, or we can go back to NuGet the same way we did before. If you want to do it that way, right click dependencies, manage NuGet packages, and then system.data.sql client, and you would just select that and click install. But the easier way to do that is just to hover this guy, hit the light bulb, and tell it, yeah, find and install the latest version. And all it did was just go out to NuGet and do the exact same thing for you, but less steps. Now we're going to put in our connection string. And for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to use server equal localhost, and you separate all of your name equal value. So name value pairs, they call them. You're going to separate those by semicolons. So the server is localhost because it's my local SQL. The database is called Savage Cell, and that's this database right here. So we know the name. And I'm just going to tell it trusted connection equal true. And what that's going to do is it's going to use my logged in Windows credentials to access the database. This won't work. The trusted connection part will not work when you put your database up in either Azure or AWS, or if you find a host that gives you shared SQL Server space. They're going to give you a user ID and a password, and you would replace this with user ID equals and password equals. And you probably wouldn't want to put that in your code, because when you commit your code to GitHub or to wherever you're going to store it, you don't want people to see your plain text login and password, but we will cover that in the future. For now, we're just going to keep going because I want to show you how to kind of make this stuff all work. Get some more of that on the screen. And then we're going to continue with our Dapper code. So we need a parameter for each one of these stored procedure parameters. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them that we need. So I'm just going to copy those. And just so I don't have to keep bouncing back and forth, I'm going to just kind of put those in here. Oops. Highlight those. Oops. See, my typing today, I don't know. All right, so there's the parameters that we need and their data types. That's kind of handy for me. So first thing I need to do is I need to store these parameters for Dapper in some kind of a list, like a collection, so that I can pass them into the stored procedure. And so I'm just going to call this parameters. And I'm going to make it equal to a new dynamic parameters. And this dynamic parameters is part of Dapper, so you have to bring in the using for Dapper. Okay, I don't know what happened. I just restarted Visual Studio, and I was able to delete this method and kind of type it back out, and I'm at the same place and everything looks the same. So I don't know if you saw something different. Oh, I think I know what I did. So I had an open paren with my using, but I never closed that using paren. I think I'm recognizing now that I opened my paren here for my, let's see if that gives that same error. Yeah, that's what it was. I was missing a paren. That's tricky. Okay, at least we figured out what it was. So now let's keep going. So now I'm going to add to this dynamic parameters collection with parameters.add, and I'm just going to add the name and the value pairs. Let's go grab those again. and we'll just stick them up here. Okay, close enough. And I'm just going to grab at first name is the parameter, and then the value is going to be inside this user object that's passed in. So I can just do user.firstname is what's going to be the value of that parameter. And then I can just duplicate these for last name, email, password, postal code, and username. I'm grabbing those from here. And so I can make the next one last name. It doesn't really matter as long as they're all there. They don't have to match what's in the stored proc, in that order. That doesn't matter. And then we're going to make the actual call to the database with an await. We're going to use that connection object that we created right up here, which is a SQL connection. And we're going to do generally one of two things. We either execute async or we can query async. And query is like if you're doing a get and you're going to get results back, you're kind of querying, you're asking a question, give me back this stuff. In the case of an insert, though, we're not really going to get anything back other than the number of rows that were affected. So if you insert 1, you probably receive a 1. And so I'm just going to tell it to just execute this async. And the first thing we have to tell it is the name of the stored procedure in the database. So I'm just going to copy that from here. And the next thing that we need to give it is our parameters. So that's fine. Parameters. And after that, named things that we don't really need all of these. Like we're not going to be using a transaction. We're not going to give it a timeout, but I do want to give it this command type because I want to tell it this is not just like select blah, blah, blah. It's actually a stored procedure. And so I'm going to name my parameter. I want to just send it this one. So if I tell it which one, then I can use a colon with that. So I can just say command type colon, and then I'm going to use the command type system.data.command type dot, and we want to tell it it's a stored procedure. And I can actually get rid of this system.data, and I can bring that into my usings up at the top, just to not have to write system.data.command type. It just added using system.data up here for me. And so that should do it. Let's get rid of these comments. And so the code's pretty clean, right? I'm just I'm creating a SQL connection. It'll get opened by this execute async because I'm calling connection.execute, and it knows when you call execute that it has to open a connection in order to execute. So you don't even have to write connection.open. So I just await the execute async. I'm calling this proc with these parameters and values, and I'm telling it it is a stored procedure. And that's it. So in our catch, we normally would put any logging, if we wanted to log any errors to a separate error database. We'll put that stuff in after. I'm not going to do it now, but I want to leave room for it so we know to come back and do it. And so that is that. So let's build and make sure we are whole. We have some lorem.net stuff that's in here from old products that I removed. So I'm just going to get rid of that because I thought we replaced that. I must have gotten some code crossed because I'm pretty sure that we had replaced this with actual database code. I'm going to get rid of it. We're going to replace this with real products anyway. So let's see if that... Okay, so now we're succeeding. I'm going to hit run. I do want to go in here and to my database And I'm going to right click users and do select top 1000 rows. And so you can see there's only one user. User ID 6 is Savage Coder. It has an email address, an encrypted password, and you know, the standard stuff. So let's launch our UI. Hopefully our swagger here is 44328. Let's make sure that matches our UI call in our repository. 44328, good. And API/users. I think we're good. I'm gonna put a breakpoint on that one, and then I'm gonna go back over to our API. And we will walk through from the user controller. So I'll put a breakpoint right there. And let's see. We don't have any products because I just removed all that. But I want to go to user management sign up. And here's our sign up form that we created last time. So I'm just going to put in a person named some user, and his username is going to be some user name, and his email is some user at sharklasers.com. Let's make it a little different than some user. Let's make it some username at sharklasers.com. The password I'm going to put in is capital PASSWRD 123 exclamation. And the zip code is going to be 44444. So when I click sign up, we get to our page here. Our user sign up object is populated with all the data, just like episode 19 gave us. And hopefully, if all goes well, when I call out to this API, I will hit the breakpoint on the API side. And I did. And the user information came over to the API fully populated. I'm going to jump into the service layer. We're going to continue passing that user into the repository. And we're going to get our SQL connection. We're going to assign all of these some username at SharkLasers to each of these parameters, and we're adding those parameters one at a time to our parameters collection. So now if we look at our parameters after we run those, you can see that there are 6 of them in there, and you can look at each one of them, and you can see first name holds some value object at first name, and the value is some. So all those got assigned. And now I'm going to run this, and as long as it doesn't error, which it did not, I can stop right here and go right to the database, and I'm just going to re-click execute here, and we should see 2 rows. And we do. There's some user, some username, the encrypted password, the postal code, username, all that stuff. So everything worked perfectly. And now it'll just bubble back up through and return no content back to the UI. And the UI probably just goes and forwards off to the confirmation reminder page, which would normally tell our users, go ahead and check your email and click on the link to activate your account. And so now that we can add a user, we can now sign in a user. And that's what the next episode is going to be about, is how to sign a user in, make sure their password is right, and generate a JWT token that we can return back to the user, and we'll use that to call get products. And that'll be an authenticated only call that if you're not logged in, you will not be able to make that call. So that's how we'll start to lock things down and put some security in place and authenticate our users. So make sure you check all this stuff out and kind of grok this stuff so that you understand it And once you're good to go, then we'll go on to the next episode and pull it all together, and hopefully it's a really good tutorial on creating your own JWT tokens. So that's it for today. I hope this was really awesome stuff. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you find this useful and you're still sticking around to the end of the episodes, thank you so much. Please subscribe and hit the bell so that I can let you know when new episodes are out. And that's it for me. Practice, practice, practice this stuff as always. And of course, I will see you in episode 21 online.